I bought this repossessed Bugatti Veyron with supposedly a broken gearbox. Nothing happened.
Somewhere in the English countryside, inside a workshop that smells of motor oil and ambition, a man known for turning automotive wreckage into mechanical miracles just received the most extraordinary phone call of his career. On the other end of the line was a representative of one of the wealthiest royal families on the planet. The offer was staggering $20 million. Not to buy cars, not to collect trophies, but to do what the most powerful automotive manufacturers in the world had already refused to do: bring 6 destroyed hypercars back from the dead. This is not a story about money. This is a story about who really controls the cars you think you own. To understand why a Saudi prince turned to a British YouTuber instead of a European factory, you first need to understand what was lost. The prince in question is a serious collector. Not the type who buys a Ferrari to take photographs at a marina. He is a man who acquires vehicles the way some people acquire pieces of art, with the intent of preserving them, understanding them, and occasionally driving them the way they were designed to be driven. His private collection, stored in a climate-controlled facility, represented decades of taste, patience, and extraordinary wealth. Then came the night that changed everything. A structural fault in the facility's fire suppression system triggered an uncontrolled discharge. Water, not clean water, but water laced with chemical suppressant, flooded the lower levels of the storage complex. Before that crisis could even be fully assessed, a secondary electrical fault caused a fire to break out in one of the bays. By the time emergency services had the situation under control, 6 vehicles were in various states of ruin. Some had been soaked. Some had burned. One had suffered both. The damage list was the kind that makes automotive insurance underwriters go pale. A Bugatti Chiron Super Sport 300 Plus with its engine compartment fused into something resembling industrial sculpture. A Ferrari SF90 Stradale that had spent the better part of 2 days partially submerged in chemically contaminated water. A Porsche 918 Spyder with a chassis deformation that the factory's own diagnostic equipment reportedly struggled to process. 3 further limited production vehicles, each with their own catastrophic story, completed the list. Combined, the 6 cars represented a replacement value somewhere north of $30 million. More than money, they represented pieces of automotive history that could not simply be reordered from a catalog. The prince did the logical thing. He contacted the manufacturers. What followed was a masterclass in how the ultra-luxury automotive world treats its own customers once the sale has been completed and the check has cleared. Bugatti's response to the Chiron was perhaps the most clinical. The fire damage had compromised what the company refers to as identifying documentation built into the vehicle's structure. Without that documentation intact, Bugatti stated, the car could not be formally returned to the road under their certification, and they would not issue a repair quotation. The vehicle would need to be decommissioned. The prince was, in effect, being told that his car no longer existed in any form the factory was prepared to acknowledge. Ferrari's position on the SF90 was different in tone but identical in outcome. The company offered to repurchase the damaged vehicle, but at a valuation that bore no meaningful relationship to what the car was actually worth. Attached to that offer was a legal condition: sign an agreement preventing any public discussion of the car's fate. The factory wanted the story buried alongside the vehicle. Porsche delivered what was perhaps the most bewildering response of all. Their engineers assessed the 918 and concluded that the chassis deformation, while measurable in millimeters, rendered the car beyond economical repair under their standards. They did not offer to repair it. They offered to sell the prince a new car at full price with a delivery window measured in years. 3 of the world's most celebrated automotive brands had looked at a client's catastrophic loss and responded with a combination of bureaucratic refusal and commercial opportunism. The prince, a man accustomed to being told yes by most of the world, found himself being told no by all 3 simultaneously. If you follow the independent automotive restoration world, Mat Armstrong's name requires no introduction. He is the man who has built a following in the millions not by reviewing cars, but by resurrecting them. Flood-damaged supercars, written-off exotica, vehicles that reputable workshops turned away at the door. What makes Armstrong unusual in his field is not simply mechanical skill. though that is considerable. It is his refusal to treat a manufacturer's verdict as the final word. He approaches every damaged car as a problem with a solution, even when the factory insists no solution exists. The prince had been watching Armstrong's work for some time before the disaster. He had seen him navigate complex electrical faults that dealers could not resolve. He had watched Armstrong's team reverse engineer systems that manufacturers designed to be deliberately opaque. And he had noticed something that many in the automotive establishment had chosen to ignore. Armstrong was often succeeding precisely where official channels had failed. The approach to Armstrong was made carefully and through intermediaries. The initial conversation was exploratory. Could 6 vehicles of this complexity, with this level of damage, genuinely be assessed and potentially restored outside of the factory network? Armstrong's answer, characteristically, was not a simple yes. It was a detailed series of questions. What was the extent of the structural damage? Had the electrical architecture been compromised by water ingress or heat? Were any of the vehicles still carrying active software locks from their previous owner profiles? The questions were the right ones. They were the questions of someone who understood that these vehicles were not simply machines. They were computers on wheels, designed with layers of manufacturer control baked into their architecture, and restoring them would require navigating that control as much as addressing the physical damage. When the terms were agreed, the scope was made clear. $20 million. 6 cars. No factory involvement. No official authorization. And no guarantee of success. What the prince understood, and what most hypercar owners do not fully appreciate until they need a repair, is that modern high-performance vehicles carry within them a form of ongoing manufacturer authority. The physical car is yours. The software that runs it, the diagnostic protocols that interpret its data, and the certification systems that determine whether it is permitted to operate, those belong to someone else. This is not accidental. It is architecture. The business model of manufacturers at this level of the market does not end at the point of sale. Parts supply, authorized servicing, software updates, and the control of what can and cannot be done to a vehicle after purchase represent revenue streams that the factory protects carefully. An independently restored hypercar, one that functions correctly without ever returning to the factory, is, from a business perspective, a threat. This is why Ferrari challenged Armstrong's previous restoration work through legal and technical channels. This is why Bugatti's contractual documentation gives the company authority over crash-damaged vehicles, even when those vehicles are in private hands. The manufacturers are not simply being difficult. They are protecting a system. The $20 million project, if successful, represents a direct challenge to that system. Not through protest or legal action, but through demonstration. If Armstrong and his team can restore 6 of the most technically complex road cars ever built, bringing them back to functional condition without factory participation, the argument that only the manufacturer can responsibly service these vehicles becomes considerably harder to sustain. The vehicles arrived at Armstrong's workshop facility in stages, each presenting its own specific set of challenges. The Bugatti presented the most dramatic physical damage. The W16 engine, the mechanical centerpiece of one of the most powerful road cars ever built, had sustained heat damage severe enough to compromise its intake architecture. Sourcing components for a Bugatti W16 through conventional channels is not straightforward under any circumstances. Sourcing them outside the factory network requires a level of ingenuity that Armstrong has made his professional signature. The Ferrari SF90's challenge was subtler but arguably more complex. Saltwater contamination of a modern hybrid system is not simply a matter of drying things out and reconnecting wires. The high-voltage battery architecture, the control modules, and the communication systems between the electric and combustion components of the powertrain had all been affected. A single corrupted module can prevent an entire system from initializing. The factory's solution, replace everything, is effective but financially punishing and logistically dependent on manufacturer cooperation that was not available. The Porsche 918's chassis deformation required a different kind of expertise entirely. Precision measurement equipment, the type typically used in professional motorsport preparation, was brought in to assess the actual structural integrity of the carbon fiber tub, as opposed to accepting the factory's categorical position that any deformation equals total loss. The findings were instructive. The numbers told a more nuanced story than the official verdict had suggested. There is a version of this story that ends with 6 cars on a transporter, driving under their own power, and a prince who is satisfied that his collection has been restored. That version is certainly possible. But the more significant outcome, whatever happens to those 6 vehicles, is the conversation this project has forced into the open. The relationship between hypercar manufacturers and their customers has always carried an imbalance of power that buyers rarely notice until they need something the factory does not want to provide. The vehicles are sold with a mythology of exclusivity and mechanical excellence. The reality is that the exclusivity extends to the repair ecosystem as well, and it is maintained not through superior quality but through deliberate restriction. Armstrong's work, funded by a man with the resources to take the manufacturers on at their own level, is asking a simple question through action rather than argument. If an independent team working without factory support can restore these vehicles to full function, what exactly is the factory's indispensability based on? The answer, increasingly, appears to be paperwork, software locks, and the control of parts supply. Not engineering superiority. Not irreplaceable knowledge. Control systems deliberately designed to make independence impossible. When that answer becomes impossible to ignore, the automotive world will need to have a conversation it has been avoiding for years. Who really owns a car after it leaves the factory floor? $20 million. 6 destroyed hypercars. 1 man with a workshop and the professional stubbornness to ignore the word no. Whether every car on that list drives again is almost beside the point. The project has already demonstrated something the manufacturers would prefer remained unexamined. The gap between what they claim only they can do and what is actually possible without them may be smaller than anyone was supposed to find out. If you found this breakdown valuable, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We cover the automotive stories that go deeper than the showroom floor, because the most interesting things in this industry happen in the workshops and the legal documents, not the press releases.